got your submission here in front of us.
Thank you.
Seen you there, so you know how it works. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Dr. Webb, members of the subcommittee of the Environment Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the 15-page submission that I submitted on the 28th of June on the Climate Change Response Zero Carbon Bill, Amendment Bill. I've come down from New Plymouth this morning to make this submission. Although I'm being considered as an individual submitter, I am delighted that since my submission went on the Environment Committee website, it has attracted a lot of interest from all sorts of places. I've received dozens of emails of support with not one negative comment. Also, I've been informed that several other submissions from interest groups make reference to my submission. The first page and a half of my submission is a bit of a pen picture of me. In summary, I'm a specialist in the technical, policy and social aspects of the environmental consequences of industrial and urban development. I have 48 years of environmental management experience in various capacities, both locally and internationally, and especially in air quality management and related fields. I've worked in 36 countries. I attended the COP21 climate change meeting in Paris, and I was involved in setting up a climate change centre, CCA at AIT, at the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok, Thailand. I've been to Antarctica twice, in 2007 down the Ross Sea, 2017 down the Weddell Sea. Those trips related to my work on climate change mitigation. As an invited participant to the Oxford University 2016 Symposium on Environmental Sustainability and Climate Change, I'm one of the two people in New Zealand who are members of the Oxford Round Table. And this is Harvard, where I've also been a visiting professor. I list my various professional affiliations on the bottom of page 1 and the top of page 2 of my submission. I have more than 4,400 connections on LinkedIn, made up of people from all walks of life. They involve dozens of people from in this building.
I'm just going to say, I'd invite you to get to the substance of your submission.
In section 2, I discuss the necessity, the urgency and the importance of the bill. I will take that as read, but there's a lot of NASA data there. In section 3 of my report, I outline what the bill contains. Again, I will take that as read. Moving on to section 4, pages 10 to 13 of my submission, here I explain my main problem with the bill as drafted. That is the target. Where did the date of 2050 come from? Not from the Paris Agreement. Article 4, paragraph 1 of the agreement uses words such as global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, recognising that peaking would take longer for developing countries and to undertake rapid reductions thereafter in accordance with best available science. The reference to the second half of the century in the wording of that article does not mean for an individual country, in this case New Zealand, that 2050 is the required date for achieving that zero carbon. Much has changed since the COP21 meeting in Paris in December 2015 and the coming into force of the Paris Agreement. The most important of that is the special report of the IPCC, global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade. That report clearly states that even more urgent action is required. Given that in the wording of Article 4, paragraph 1 that I referred to, is incumbent on countries like New Zealand to make those reductions as soon as possible and certainly achieve net zero carbon well before 2050. Now, I have long advocated a timeframe of 2030 for New Zealand to achieve net zero carbon dioxide equivalent emissions and net negative carbon dioxide equivalent emissions after then. This was based on such things as our large percentage of electricity generation from renewable resources, 84% four-quarter moving average as of March this year, and our high level of innovation. Now, with the long period of inaction that has gone on, a 2030 timeframe looks increasingly unachievable. On page 13 of my submission, I provide an alternative, very simple approach that may be now more appropriate. I've received wide support for this locally and internationally. My alternative suggestion is the Act should require New Zealand's gross emissions of greenhouse gases expressed as carbon dioxide equivalent emissions be reduced by at least 20% for every 0.1 degrees centigrade of global warming as determined by the World Meteorological Organization. The Climate Change Commission should determine the most cost-effective actions to achieve those reductions. Now, this is a different type of stepping stones, but it is a stepping stone. This approach demonstrates simplicity by being based solely on New Zealand doing its part to achieve the central aim of the Paris Agreement and the purpose of this bill, namely to preventing a global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. We're already more than 1 degree. No timeframes required. The only metric is the easy to understand gross emissions, albeit expressed in terms of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. In pages 14 and 15 of my submission, I discuss other problems I have with the bill as drafted. These are the lack of powers of the Climate Change Commission, being mainly providing advice to the Minister for Climate Change with no decision-making powers. Decision-making would be by a simple majority in Parliament. In my submission on the Zero Carbon Bill, I favoured the Commission having similar powers to those of the Commerce Commission. I remain firmly of that view. A final problem with the bill as drafted is the lack of enforcement mechanisms. It has been described as a bill with bark but no bite. I agree. There is no provision for enforcement via courts for a breach of the target or emission budgets. Those concerns are directed at the implications for future progress on addressing climate change. I also mentioned in my submission that the Paris Agreement was similarly criticised for its lack of enforcement provisions, most notably by James Hansen, a former NASA scientist and a renowned climate change expert. He referred to the agreement as consisting of promises or aims and not firm commitments, and he called it a fraud. Now, although I choose to use more diplomatic words than that, I do not disagree with James Hansen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. But we have your submission. I don't have any questions.
Well, could I just, through you, Mr. Chair, just say to Kevin that I thought his submission was well thought out. I spent a lot of time on it. It was just one comment I think I heard you say, Kevin, that you thought the 2030 target should be it. So you suggesting that 2050, the aspirations for 2050 should occur by 2030. I think you then went on to say there hasn't been enough done. So that 2030 target is probably unachievable.
Since the end of 2015, when I was at the COP21 meeting in Paris, funded by the EU, I have advocated 2030 and negative carbon dioxide equivalent emissions after that for New Zealand, given the wording of the article. Clearly, that's not going to be achieved. Too much time has gone by. I talk about the long period between the Zero Carbon Bill and the first reading in the House. So, although I think that would be nice if we could achieve that, I think that's unrealistic. And hence I've come up with this other thing which has no time frame. You just do not exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade, and New Zealand does its part to prevent that. Very simple. And all the stuff about methane and that the Climate Change Commission, the right people appointed, can come up with the best way to achieve that with decision-making powers.
Okay.
Subject to statutory through the courts. Statutory analysis.
Thank you.
Similar to the Commerce Commission in the Reserve Bank.
Kevin, thank you very much. Really well put together submission. Thank you.